I still remember the way the smoke from the charcoal grill curled into the late afternoon sky that Saturday, the scent of burgers and bratwurst mingling with the faint sweetness of corn on the cob roasting over the open flame. We were at my sister-in-law's backyard in Plano, Texas, and everything about that day screamed ordinary. Red and white checkered tablecloths on folding tables, kids running barefoot across the lawn with sticky hands from melted popsicles, a cooler full of Bud Light and iced tea rattling with every pull of the aluminum lid. My wife, Jenna, was in her usual spot near the potato salad, laughing at some joke my brother had made about his fantasy football team. She had that effortless smile that had first drawn me to her during a tailgate at a Cowboys game years ago, the kind of grin that made the chaos of a crowded stadium feel intimate, like we were the only two people in a sea of screaming fans. I watched her as I sipped a lukewarm beer from the cooler, thinking about how far we'd come since our first road trip up the Pacific Coast Highway. Those nights camping on the cliffs above Big Sur, her head on my shoulder, headlights painting the ocean silver in the distance. It felt like a lifetime ago, and yet that same warmth lingered, or at least I thought it did. I had always prided myself on noticing the small things, the subtle shifts that hinted at something unsaid. There was a rhythm to our marriage, one that usually made deviations obvious. That's why the first clue seemed so trivial at the time. A glance she avoided, a pause before answering a text, the faint crease between her brows when she thought I wasn't looking. None of it screamed betrayal. It could have been work stress or a minor family drama, but it stuck in my head like a line of static in an otherwise clear channel. And in hindsight, maybe that was the universe nudging me, trying to whisper the truth I refused to hear. We met back in Austin, at a diner off South Congress where the jukebox played old Motown hits and the waitresses wore faded aprons with coffee stains like badges of honor. She was scribbling something on a napkin. I was nursing a black coffee, and I remember thinking, God, she looks familiar. Or maybe it's that her energy fills the room. Our first conversation was about nothing. The weather, the traffic on I-35, the newest taco spot downtown. But somewhere between the pancakes and her laugh echoing off the brick walls, I realized I wanted more than this casual interaction. I wanted a lifetime of mornings where sunlight streamed across her hair. By the time we moved in together, I thought I knew her like the back of my hand. We had our traditions, Sunday football games on the couch, with greasy pizza boxes piled high, spontaneous road trips to Dallas for concerts, Christmas mornings with homemade cinnamon rolls and our neighbor's dogs running through the yard. To anyone on the outside, we were perfect, or at least convincingly so. Back at the cookout, Jenna was chatting with her cousin Marissa, who had flown in from Chicago. Marissa was loud, brash in a way that contrasted with Jenna's calm, and she had that kind of energy that drew people in, but left you wary if you lingered too long. I didn't pay much attention at first, letting them talk about work and life and all the usual family minutiae. The kids were bickering over a frisbee, the barbecue smoke clinging to everyone's clothes, and I was half listening while scrolling through texts on my phone. Nothing unusual, just work reminders, the occasional meme from friends. Then, as I walked past the cooler to refill my beer, a phrase from Marissa's mouth caught me mid-step. I froze, the aluminum can rattling in my hand. "And you've been with two men the whole time, haven't you?" Marissa's voice was casual, almost teasing, but the words hit me like a punch. I thought I misheard. My stomach dropped, cold and heavy, a sudden weight where lightness had been just seconds ago. I glanced over, pretending to tie my shoe or check the ground for something, but my eyes caught the way Jenna stiffened, her smile faltering for a heartbeat before she masked it again. That brief flicker, so fleeting that anyone else would have missed it, was enough for me to realize something was off. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of the woman I thought I knew with the words I'd just overheard. Two men? The thought was absurd, impossible. Yet the way Marissa said it, the sly grin on her face as if sharing a juicy secret, made my pulse spike with disbelief and dread. I retreated a few steps, letting the laughter and chatter of the backyard wash over me while I processed. Jenna continued her conversation, casually sipping from a soda can, but there was tension in her gestures, the subtle brushing of hair behind her ear, the way she kept her body angled slightly away from me. It wasn't enough for anyone else to notice, but my eyes, trained over years of shared life, didn't miss. That was the thing about love. It teaches you to read between the lines, to see what's left unsaid, to feel the tremor beneath a calm voice. I wanted to confront her right then and there, to demand an explanation, but a part of me knew the truth might shatter more than just my trust. It could rip the whole fabric of my life apart. I wandered toward the far end of the yard, pretending to admire the new landscaping. Jenna's mom had spent weeks planting marigolds and petunias, everything color-coded with military precision. From this vantage point, I could see both of them, Marissa animatedly recounting a story while Jenna nodded along, too composed, too careful. The flicker of suspicion grew into a steady burn in my chest. Every laugh seemed forced, every gesture a careful calculation. I remembered the times Jenna had left her phone on silent, the sudden trips she claimed were for errands, but always conveniently vague, the late nights she spent working while I stayed home catching the last innings of the Rangers game. Nothing concrete, just breadcrumbs that, until now, I'd brushed aside in the comfort of denial. The kids ran past, tumbling into a pile of grass and giggling as Jenna scooped one of them up, and I envied that innocence for a fleeting moment. Life outside that backyard was messy, full of taxes, bills, and obligations. But right here, I had thought we were safe. Yet the words lingered, persistent and sharp. 2 men. My mind couldn't settle. Was it recent? Had this been ongoing for months, years? I couldn't breathe, not fully, not without imagining 1,000 scenarios that all ended with heartbreak. The laughter from the adults seemed hollow now, a soundtrack to a moment I could never unhear. I wanted to leave, to escape before confronting what I might not be able to handle, but curiosity tethered me to the spot. I inched closer under the guise of refilling the ice in the cooler, every step measured, every breath shallow. Marissa, oblivious to my growing panic, continued talking, tossing off details like confetti, where she had been, who she had been with, little comments that now, pieced together, formed a tapestry of betrayal. Jenna's lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes darting occasionally to mine, and in that glance I saw the truth reflected. Guilt, fear, and something unspoken that terrified me more than words could. The backyard, once a place of comfort, felt claustrophobic. The scent of grilling meat no longer brought hunger, only nausea. I realized then that the life I had known, the shared jokes, the Sunday football rituals, the late-night drives with the city lights bleeding into the horizon, it had all been built on a foundation that might be cracking beneath me. My fingers tightened around the cold can of beer, and I felt an impulse I'd never imagined. To record, to remember, to have proof before confronting a truth that could change everything. But I stopped myself, knowing that evidence would come later, in its own time. Right now, I had to survive the scene, keep my composure, and navigate the storm that was only beginning to stir. As the sun dipped behind the distant rooftops, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, I realized one thing: nothing would ever be the same. The laughter of my family, the sizzling of the grill, the carefree shouts of children, all of it felt like a thin veneer, a beautiful illusion hiding something dark underneath. And yet, there was still a small part of me that wanted to believe I could salvage it, that maybe, just maybe, there was an explanation that didn't involve betrayal. But the look in Jenna's eyes, the way she avoided mine for just a heartbeat too long, told me otherwise. I stepped back, letting the crowd of relatives block me from view, and felt the first real pang of panic. My mind raced with questions I wasn't ready to answer. How long had this been going on? Who else knew? And most importantly, what would I do when the truth came crashing down? For now, I remained silent, pretending to pour ice over bottles. But inside, a storm had already begun. And I knew that by the end of this barbecue, nothing would feel normal again. The days following that barbecue blurred together in a haze of tension and quiet observation. I told no one, not my friends, not my family, not even Jenna herself. Pretending everything was normal became a performance I was forced to rehearse daily, smiling at coworkers while my mind dissected every laugh, every glance, every casual touch she had. At first, I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, the product of a single overheard comment twisted by fear. But the nagging unease refused to dissipate. It gnawed at me like a low hum beneath the fabric of ordinary life. I started noticing patterns I had ignored before. The late-night bathroom trips when she said she was just grabbing water, the sudden increase in phone passwords, the way she habitually silenced notifications when I walked into the room. It was subtle, almost laughably so, but it was enough to light a fuse. I began to observe without interference, making mental notes in my head and storing trivial details as evidence for later scrutiny. Her car was parked slightly off in the driveway when she said she was working late. the tires cleaned and polished as if she had stopped somewhere she didn't want me to know about. Receipts began to appear in odd places, one tucked under a throw pillow, another slipped into the side pocket of her purse. Small, unassuming slips of paper that hinted at dinners I had never been invited to, gas stations in towns we had never visited, hotel stays in cities I couldn't immediately place. I photographed each receipt with my phone, cataloging them meticulously with timestamps, labeling each with a mental note of context, each a breadcrumb leading down a path I was reluctant to follow. I purchased a basic iPhone data backup tool and began syncing her messages, scanning for any anomalies. It was painstaking, scrolling through hundreds of innocuous texts and GIFs, but patterns emerged. A series of late-night conversations with someone named M, cryptic, casual, intimate in a way that sent chills down my spine. I found a string of messages that began as ordinary chat, asking about work, commenting on a TV show, but gradually morphed into something more suggestive, playful teasing that didn't belong to the marriage I thought I had. She typed carefully, knowing I might one day notice, choosing words that skirted the line between affection and secrecy. And in between those texts, I found what I needed. Photos she had sent, images of herself dressed differently, smiles aimed at the camera in ways that weren't meant for me. Every receipt and text was a small explosion in my chest, a confirmation that what I had feared was no longer a hypothetical. The idea of her being involved with two men, the words from Marissa's mouth echoing in my head, crystallized into something tangible. I cross-referenced the locations on her receipts with her claimed whereabouts, and the gaps were glaring. Nights she said she was working late coincided with hotel stays less than an hour's drive from each other, sometimes in cities neither of us had discussed visiting. It was meticulous, coordinated, and terrifying in its precision. I didn't confront her immediately. Instead, I began collecting evidence in a more formalized way, almost like a private investigator without the badge. I rented a small, discreet digital recorder and placed it in the car, making sure it captured conversations when she made calls outside the home. I documented her schedule in a spreadsheet, noting anomalies and cross-referencing them with bank statements and online orders. My life became a series of calculations and observations, turning everyday routines into data points, each one feeding the growing certainty that my marriage was being orchestrated around a hidden agenda. One evening, I noticed she left her laptop open on the dining table after a long day. It was a small, golden opportunity, and I seized it. Her email contained confirmations for restaurants, Airbnb reservations, and tickets, some under names I didn't recognize, some addressed to initials that matched her messages. She had been careful, but not careful enough. Each email felt like a dagger, each confirmation a nail in a coffin of illusions I had built around us. The images attached to some of these messages showed her laughing with other men, the kind of laughter reserved for intimacy, private moments that were never meant for me. I copied every attachment, every detail, storing them securely on an external drive I hid in my study. The more I collected, the more I noticed the cracks in her routine. Her friends began sending subtle, coded messages in group chats, photos tagged with her in places she hadn't mentioned, emojis that hinted at secrets. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How many people had been complicit in keeping this hidden from me? How long had she been leading a double life? Each discovery was both confirmation and punishment, a psychological chess game where I had no pieces left to play except to observe and remember. The pinnacle of my evidence came unexpectedly. Jenna had ordered a DNA test kit under the guise of participating in a health survey, claiming curiosity about her ancestry. When the package arrived, I intercepted it before she could use it. Opening it quietly, I realized this could be the final piece, the irrefutable proof that would remove all doubt. But I didn't rush to send it off. I wanted to be methodical, to let the narrative unfold naturally, ensuring that when the truth came to light, it would be undeniable. I also began documenting behavioral inconsistencies. She would sometimes leave the home for grocery runs that lasted hours, only to return with items that didn't match the receipt, or sometimes with nothing at all. Occasionally, she would laugh at private jokes on her phone, the kind of laughter that couldn't be attributed to a show or text message with friends. The list of inconsistencies grew, and with each addition, I felt a strange combination of dread and vindication. Dread because the life I had known was unraveling, vindication because my suspicions were being validated with concrete evidence. And then came the message from Marissa, sent innocuously via a group chat for an upcoming family barbecue. I hadn't opened it immediately, fearing the emotional impact, but curiosity got the better of me. The text read, "Can't wait to see you and Jenna. I have some stories you won't believe." My chest tightened. Every fiber of my being screamed that this was the signal, the moment when whispers would become a tidal wave. I scrolled through the message thread, noting the timing, the tone, the subtle cues that hinted at shared secrets. My worst fears were no longer hypothetical. They were impending, inevitable. By the end of the week, I had compiled enough material to confront reality without question. Photos, receipts, texts, email confirmations, behavioral logs, and even the intercepted DNA kit, all lined up like dominoes, each one tipping toward the truth I had resisted acknowledging. Every day she came home, I felt the tension thickening, like the air before a storm breaks. I would watch her move through the house, laugh at something trivial, and all the while, my mind replayed the evidence, cross-referencing each detail, building a case in silence. It wasn't easy. Every morning I went through a ritual, checking her phone, scanning receipts, noting anomalies in her schedule, capturing screenshots, archiving emails. Friends began noticing my distracted demeanor, colleagues commented on my quiet intensity. But I had no intention of letting anyone interfere. I needed to understand fully before revealing anything. It was as if I were preparing a courtroom within my own mind, assembling exhibits, testimonies, and a timeline that could withstand the scrutiny of reality itself. Then, one night, the confirmation came in the form I had both dreaded and anticipated. A text, sent accidentally to me from Jenna's phone while she thought she was messaging Marissa. "Did you take care of the other one tonight? He won't suspect a thing." My hands shook as I read it. It was not a slip of words or an ambiguous phrase. It was explicit, undeniable. Two men, the exact words Marissa had casually thrown out at the barbecue, spoken like a joke, were now etched in digital ink as proof. The denial, the questioning, the rationalizations, all vanished in that single moment. The nightmare was real, and my carefully curated evidence now transformed from suspicion to absolute certainty. I sat back, heart hammering, the hum of the refrigerator loud in the quiet house. For the first time since the barbecue, I allowed myself to breathe, but it was shallow and sharp. My mind raced with the next steps: confrontation, exposure, public humiliation, but also a twinge of fear. What if she gaslighted me, denied everything, or turned the blame in a way that left me stranded? I had to be precise, methodical, unshakable. The evidence I had gathered would protect me from deceit, and yet, the emotional toll was immense. By the time the sun rose over Dallas the following morning, casting golden light across the hardwood floors of our home, I knew there was no going back. The breadcrumbs had led me here, the subtle shifts, the overlooked receipts, the fleeting glances, all culminating in a stark, unavoidable truth. The foundation of my marriage was cracked, and the structure I had spent years building now teetered on the edge. The next step would be critical: confronting her, exposing the duplicity, and ensuring that the truth was not only acknowledged, but undeniable. The storm was gathering, and I could feel it in my bones, ready to break with a force that would leave nothing unchanged. And just as I gathered the courage to finally take action, my phone buzzed with a notification from Marissa. "We need to talk, soon. It's bigger than you think." My stomach dropped. Bigger than I had imagined? I froze, the room around me fading into background noise. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't just about the two men, or the lies, or the betrayal. It was something far more complicated, far more dangerous, and entirely unexpected. The calm before the hurricane had passed, and I was about to step directly into the eye of the storm. The following Saturday, the backyard was already humming with the familiar chaos of a family BBQ, the scent of grilled burgers mingling with the sweet tang of corn on the cob, kids running in circles, a Bud Light sweating on the picnic table beside a half-empty cooler. I had arrived early, pretending to be cheerful, greeting cousins and aunts with practiced smiles, all while my mind traced the evidence I had painstakingly gathered over the last week. Jenna was late, which was unusual for her, but I told myself nothing. Staying calm was part of the strategy. As I surveyed the scene, Marissa approached with that sly grin I had learned to read like an open book. Her eyes sparkled with mischief and anticipation, the kind that warned me she knew exactly what was about to unfold. When Jenna finally arrived, she carried herself with that familiar air of confidence, laughing lightly, waving at everyone as if nothing were amiss. But I could see the tiny tells, the way her hand lingered on her phone and her purse, the quick glances at Marissa as they exchanged a brief whispered word, the subtle straightening of her posture as she scanned the crowd. The kind of posture that screams, "I have secrets." My chest tightened, and I told myself to breathe, to remain collected. This was not about anger. It was about undeniable truth. I had waited for a moment when most of the family was distracted, when the kids were chasing a frisbee across the lawn and Uncle Terry had gone to check the smoker. I subtly positioned myself behind the picnic table, where my phone sat connected to a portable speaker, hooked up to a small audio recorder I had planted in Jenna's purse days before. The plan was simple: play back a selection of the messages, calls, and intercepted conversations in a place where witnesses could see and hear. I wanted no ambiguity, no chance for her to spin the narrative. The evidence had to speak for itself. As I cued the first playback, Jenna's laughter faltered, her eyes darting to me. The first audio clip was innocuous, a casual conversation, barely noticeable, but the next two were impossible to ignore. Her voice, flirty, intimate, laughing at jokes that weren't mine, discussing rendezvous locations, timing, names, M and another, references to meals, movies, hotel rooms. I watched as the color drained from her face, the careful mask of composure cracking in tiny increments. Cousins and aunts began to glance over, curious at the sudden tension. Marissa didn't hide her smirk. She leaned casually against the fence, clearly enjoying the scene. "Jenna," I said, voice steady but edged with icy control, "care to explain this?" I gestured toward the speaker, the recordings playing the very proof I had compiled. The background noise of laughter and sizzling meat faded into silence as people tuned in, sensing the gravity of the moment. Jenna opened her mouth, and for a second I thought she might deny everything, but the words caught somewhere between her tongue and the air, leaving a pregnant pause. It's not what it sounds like," she finally said, voice trembling slightly, the kind of line that had worked in movies but never in real life. I had anticipated denial, gaslighting, excuses, but hearing her say it aloud in front of witnesses had a different impact. There was no room for spin. Every ear in that backyard now carried pieces of her double life, meticulously documented, undeniably real. I walked slowly around the table, letting everyone's gaze follow me, letting the gravity of the evidence settle like dust in the golden Texas afternoon. "Not what it sounds like? Jenna, we've been together for 8 years. I have your receipts, your messages, your emails. I have a DNA test kit you tried to hide. Not what it sounds like?" My voice carried authority, calm, deliberate, and the words landed with the weight of inevitability. Murmurs rippled through the family, soft at first, then louder as people realized the confrontation wasn't a private spat but a full-scale reveal. Her hands shook as she clutched her purse, eyes darting to Marissa, who shrugged with faux innocence. I continued, letting the crowd absorb every detail, the receipts for hotels, the emails confirming dinners and flights, the texts with M, and finally the DNA kit sitting conspicuously on the table next to her phone. Each item was a bullet point in a damning testimony of betrayal. Some of the older cousins whispered among themselves, while younger ones gawked, unable to fully comprehend the adult implications but sensing the drama. "People need to hear this," Gambazas, I said, and played the final audio clip, the one that confirmed everything unequivocally, her voice admitting the ongoing involvement with 2 men, her laughter betraying the intimacy I had long suspected. The clip ended, and silence settled over the yard like a thick fog. I could hear the distant sizzle of the grill, but it was as if the world had slowed, allowing every ear to register the words. Jenna's jaw dropped, eyes wide, lips trembling. Why are you doing this here?" she stammered, her voice now shaky, almost pleading. But I wasn't here for excuses. I wasn't here for tears or manipulation. The proof spoke louder than any apology she could conjure. "I've documented everything," I said simply, my voice cutting through the tension. "I've been patient, but the facts don't lie. You lied to me. You lied to yourself. And you lied to everyone else who trusted you. This isn't personal anymore. It's reality." At that moment, the true humiliation of the reveal took hold. Marissa, who had been leaning casually, now stepped forward, shaking her head in disbelief at Jenna's audacity to maintain composure. "We all knew something was off," she said, loud enough for several neighbors leaning over the fence to hear. But hearing it out loud, wow. The words landed like extra weight on Jenna's shoulders, her carefully curated facade collapsing in the open air. Jenna tried to speak again, but I raised a hand, letting the silence and the crowd do the work. I could feel the adrenaline surge, the kind that made every detail sharp. The sunlight glinting off a soda can, the kids frozen mid-laugh, cousins whispering, a dog barking in the distance. It was perfect, grotesque in its symmetry. The setting as mundane as a backyard BBQ, yet charged with the most extraordinary betrayal. Then, as if scripted for dramatic effect, the gavel of reality hit hardest. Uncle Terry, unaware of the audio setup, approached with a spatula in hand, stepping into the circle of witnesses. His slow blink, his slack-jawed stare, the way he dropped the spatula in shock. It was comical, if it weren't so tragic. Around us, the murmurs became conversations, conversations became heated discussions, and Jenna's attempts at explanation evaporated into the Texas air, leaving only truth. Finally, the last piece of theater, her phone, which had been quietly recording snippets of our family gathering, buzzed. It was a notification, a group text from the other man, simply saying, "Everything went smoothly today. Thanks for trusting me." My chest tightened as everyone's attention turned to the small screen on the table. A laugh, bitter and sharp, escaped my lips. The evidence was incontrovertible, undeniable, and publicly humiliating. Jenna's face flushed crimson, her previous confidence dissolved into panic, confusion, and shame. As the crowd digested the moment, some taking sides, some whispering judgments, the reality struck. She had been outmaneuvered, exposed with precision, every lie laid bare in the bright daylight, the perfect irony of a family cookout turning into the stage for ultimate betrayal. And in that instant, I realized something essential. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about clarity, about witnessing truth in its rawest form, about allowing reality to confront deceit. And just as I was about to step back, letting the family absorb the aftermath, Jenna made one last desperate move. She lunged toward the cooler, knocking over a half-empty bottle of Bud Light, which toppled onto the grass and rolled under the picnic table. The fizz erupted loudly, startling a few kids and sending cousins scrambling to rescue the drinks. The sound of carbonation hissing and bottles clattering served as the punctuation mark to a drama years in the making. I stood still, letting the chaos underscore the moment, the mess, the embarrassment, the collapse of a life built on duplicity. Her voice cracked as she finally whispered, almost to herself, I didn't think anyone would find out, but everyone had. Every neighbor who had peeked over the fence, every family member, every cousin, aunt and uncle, now understood the scope of her deception. The backyard, once a place of laughter and grilled meat, had become a court of truth. And in that silence, I could feel a strange sense of liberation washing over me. The suffocating tension of suspicion had been replaced by undeniable clarity. I stepped aside, letting her process the exposure, letting the crowd whisper and judge, letting the story unfold naturally. And as I glanced toward Marissa, who gave a subtle nod, I understood that the next chapter, aftermath, damage control, healing, was inevitable. This confrontation had stripped away pretense, leaving only consequences and the raw, unfiltered aftermath of betrayal. But just as I thought the scene had reached its apex, the distant sound of a child's laughter, mingled with the unmistakable buzz of a phone recording, reminded me that the story wasn't over. Someone else had captured the entire spectacle on video. Another layer of exposure, another layer of permanence. The gavel had been metaphorically struck, but in reality, it would echo far beyond this backyard, into family group chats, social media threads, and the consciousness of everyone who had ever known her carefully curated image. The full scope of the storm was still unfolding, and I, for the first time in months, felt a flicker of grim satisfaction. The week after the backyard confrontation felt surreal, as if I was walking through life in a half-dream, where every familiar street corner, every diner and gas station I passed reminded me of the upheaval Jenna had caused. The divorce papers had been filed the day after the BBQ. Her lawyer tried the usual tactics: minimize, question my evidence, insinuate that perhaps I had overreacted, but I had anticipated every move. The court date was set for early Friday morning, the Texas sun streaming through the blinds of my office window as I signed off on affidavits and financial disclosures. I felt an odd mix of exhaustion and liberation. 8 years of marriage had ended not with a whispered apology or a dramatic showdown in some glossy magazine spread, but with quiet, precise legal maneuvering. The custody arrangements were surprisingly amicable, considering the chaos that had unfolded. Jenna had made her choices, and the court, guided by documented evidence and objective assessment, had granted me primary custody of our son, Ethan. He was blissfully unaware of the adult complexities surrounding him, his world still defined by blocks, football games, and Saturday morning cartoons. I was determined to keep it that way. The first Saturday after the court ruling, I woke early, the smell of sizzling bacon drawing me to the kitchen. I flipped pancakes for Ethan, letting him pour syrup in globs, his small hands smearing butter across the plate. The simplicity of the moment, the unspoken warmth of pancakes, laughters, and syrup, reminded me that life could still feel ordinary, even after extraordinary betrayal. I started returning to routines I had long neglected. The local diner where the waitresses knew my name and my order, 2 eggs over easy, hash browns, and a Bud Light in the evening became my sanctuary. I spent evenings on the porch, cold beer in hand, watching Ethan draw crayon masterpieces on discarded cardboard boxes, his imagination spilling into the mundane landscape of our driveway. It was grounding, a contrast to the surreal spectacle of last week's BBQ. I realized that while Jenna's actions had shattered illusions, they hadn't shattered life itself. I could still create pockets of normalcy, spaces where the chaos of deceit couldn't reach us. There were moments, of course, when memories of the backyard confrontation or the audio clips haunted me. Notifications from family group texts still occasionally pinged on my phone, filled with whispers, judgments, or shocked emojis. But I had cultivated a sense of detachment, a practical acceptance that some things were beyond my control. I had the facts, the truth, and custody of my son, and that was enough. The rest was commentary, noise, and distraction, and I had learned to let it fade into the background, like distant traffic or the hum of a refrigerator in a quiet kitchen. Financially, the divorce was straightforward. Jenna had claimed certain assets, but the meticulous documentation I had compiled, coupled with the clear proof of her betrayal, ensured that settlement negotiations favored me. There were no dramatic auctions, no viral videos of courtroom meltdowns, just practical resolution, with bank transfers, signature lines, and official stamps providing a sense of closure. As I walked out of the lawyer's office after the final meeting, I felt a peculiar blend of satisfaction and relief. The legal system, with its dry formalities and procedural rigor, had given me what theatrics could not: definitive conclusion. In the evenings, I returned to simpler pleasures. The ESPN games became ritualistic, a way to decompress while Ethan sprawled on the living room rug, drawing his latest masterpiece. Occasionally, I cracked open a Bud Light, letting the cold, familiar taste anchor me in reality. I even started a small vegetable patch in the backyard, watching tomato plants and bell peppers grow, a tiny, tangible metaphor for resilience. Every sprout, every blossom, felt like reclaiming a piece of life that had been momentarily poisoned by deception. The family dynamic slowly adjusted as well. Some relatives, initially shocked by the BBQ revelation, reached out with cautious support. Others distanced themselves, unwilling to process the drama or unwilling to take sides. I accepted it all as part of the natural fallout. Loyalty and trust, I realized, were fluid and situational, and the measure of my own resilience wasn't dependent on their opinions. Ethan, however, was steady. His laughter, his questions about pancakes or cartoons, his spontaneous hugs provided a constant reminder of what truly mattered. Therapy became a quiet but essential component of recovery. A counselor helped me navigate anger, grief, and residual anxiety, not just about Jenna, but about trust, betrayal, and the shock of public exposure. Sessions were practical, grounded in behavioral strategies and reflection exercises, with occasional discussions about the irony of a backyard BBQ becoming a courtroom of public opinion. The counselor encouraged me to redefine my metrics of control and success. It wasn't about revenge or humiliation or even proving who was right or wrong. It was about reclaiming normalcy, autonomy, and the small joys of daily life. Over time, the humor of the situation emerged, the absurdity of it all. I laughed quietly to myself, thinking about the soda can fizzing over the grass, the dog chasing the frisbee into the chaos, and Jenna's flustered, panicked expression as the truth unfolded. Life had delivered its own comedy, and while it had been painful, it also reminded me that some of the most vivid lessons arrive wrapped in ridiculous packaging. Sometimes, the universe has a way of balancing exposure with theater, teaching humility, resilience, and the value of ordinary moments. One Sunday morning, I sat on the porch with Ethan, sipping coffee while he built a Lego tower. The neighborhood was calm, the Texas sun gentle, the air carrying the faint smell of barbecue from distant yards. "Dad, can we have pancakes again?" he asked, eyes bright, oblivious to the adult dramas surrounding him. I smiled, thinking about the resilience of children and the importance of simple joys. "Sure, buddy. Let's make it a tradition," I said, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with revenge or bitterness. The pancakes would come, the Bud Light would wait in the fridge for evenings of quiet decompression, and the small routines would anchor us in life's ordinary pleasures. I reflected on the entire ordeal, the betrayal, the evidence, the public confrontation, the legal proceedings, and the aftermath. It struck me that revenge, while tempting, was rarely satisfying in the long term. True peace came not from humiliation or retaliation, but from clarity, boundaries, and reclaiming agency over one's own life. I had learned to identify the toxicity, document it, confront it when necessary, and then release it, not with fire and spectacle, but with precision, pragmatism, and quiet assertion of what mattered most. By the time the leaves began to turn, signaling the subtle shift from summer to fall, I felt a sense of equilibrium returning. Weekends were filled with football games, the aroma of grilled food, neighborhood walks, and evenings of TV and conversation. Ethan's laughter became the soundtrack of recovery, his presence the most reliable barometer of what was important. And in those moments, I realized that even though the betrayal had left scars, it had also illuminated the strength of boundaries, the necessity of vigilance, and the profound value of ordinary, honest living. Sometimes, late at night, I would glance at the quiet backyard, remember the sounds of that fateful BBQ, the fizz of soda, the murmurs of relatives, Jenna's shocked gasp, and smile faintly. Not with malice, but with understanding. Life moves forward, chaos eventually settles, and people get what they create through their choices. I had chosen patience, documentation, and quiet strategy, and it had served me better than rage ever could. And most importantly, I had reclaimed the sanctuary of ordinary moments, breakfast pancakes, a Bud Light on the porch, and my son's laughter filling the house with resilience. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, I raised my can of Bud Light in a private toast, to truth, to endurance, to life beyond betrayal. And quietly, almost as an afterthought, I whispered to myself, "Sometimes the trash takes itself out." It was simple, it was American, it was real, and it was exactly the closure I needed.